Hello everyone, welcome to another D&D Beyond tutorial video. So again, like before, we are going through some of the older stuff. This year we're going through some of the 2016 UA. We are not touching UA that has been put into a published work. We are not touching UA that cannot really be messed with in terms of the D&D Beyond Homebrew tutorials. Like there were pieces this year about quick generation of characters or encounter design. We can't really touch them. Same with the revised ranger. Revised ranger, though, I'm going to put a slight pin in because we might come back to that when we discuss the mystic class and how you can kind of generate these things using the current class subclass system. The only other thing I want to bring up is last time when I tried this at 2015, it turned into a lot of me going for old UA and basically restating things that were already in the tutorial videos for how to make feats, how to make subclasses. So what I'm going through is for UA that hasn't been redone, trying to find maybe one key thing and then talking about how we would make it work. So the UAs from 2016 that haven't really been touched since was the Bard College of Satire in the UA kits, the Protection Domain in a Cleric UA package, Circle of Twilight for a Druid one, Fighter had Knight and Sharpshooter, and Paladin had Oath of Treachery. Now, Oath of Treachery and the Fighter ones we're not going to cover today, because I looked through them and there wasn't really anything I looked at and went, okay, that's something we can talk about today. The other one is Theurgy. We're going to come to that last. So for College of Satire, again, it with the other subclasses largely follows the same principles as before, so I decided to take one thing from each just to try and have something to talk about today. So over here we're going to look at, so for Fool's Insight, this one was very simple. It was you got detect magic and detect thoughts a number of times equal to your charisma modifier, regain them on a long rest. The second part, which is a fluffy paragraph, you just leave to the description. Mechanically, just to reiterate, you would put detect thoughts here in spell, use by ability modifier charisma, reset long. Nice, simple, easy. The rest of it's largely text-based pieces or pieces that you can't mechanically really do anything weird with the homebrew system. Cleric Protection largely was the same. I wanted to discuss this one with you though, Indomitable Defense. So Indomitable Defense was that on a long rest or a short rest, you could pick two of the stated resistance types to gain resistance to, with the ability then as an action to give it to someone else. There are two ways you could go about this. The first one is purely you leave it as a text box and let the players remember what they've picked, what they're doing. One you could do, though it takes a little bit more management from the player, is obviously as an action and bonus action list the giving up and returning of the damage, and then using the options, class feature options, picking two, putting two here is 17/17, so it knows you've got two class options when you get the ability. List each of the damage types as a resistance as an option, putting in the modifiers for that option, resistance to the damage type, and basically whenever they take a short rest or a long rest, if they want to alter it, they'll have to go back into the character creator and select the new option they want to take. This would mean it shows up on the sheet. Of course, if they use the action to temporarily remove it, they would have to remember, maybe may give it a charge so it has a little tip box they can remember, I have given away one of my damage types, so I remember not to use it. That's probably the only way you can really do it currently in the system. Hopefully as more tools come out, we'll get more stuff. Speak of which, they did mention they are currently working on the universal feature system, and that once they've worked on that, they're going to go back to old homebrew tools and re-modify them to make them easier to use. So at that point, I will have to redo all these tutorials again, but I will redo them as soon as we know what those updates are. So that's Cleric and Indomitable Defense. Circle of Twilight did not, I believe, have anything, because largely it was give you spells, at which point you would again do it just as we did earlier with, yes. So that is, as I said, a lot of it is retreading old ground. The one that was very interesting was the Urgy. So this was in the non-divine faithful document, and this is, for those who remember 3.5, there was the archivist, who was effectively a cleric with a spell book like a wizard, but they learned, of course, cleric spells, but it allowed you to effectively have divine magic without being tied to a god. So the big thing about it is the fact that, as you can see here, you basically at certain levels will get the abilities of a cleric subclass domain. How do we do this? Well, we unfortunately have to do it as options. So at level 1, they had, level 2, you had divine inspiration. So what you do is you list each domain as an option. Then, when we go in to do later pieces, so for example, we go to, because once you've chosen your domain, all the later unlocks that unlock features of that domain's abilities are tied to which domain you pick at the start. So, when this loads, so if we go with Arcane Acolyte, which is the 6th level, Arcane Acolyte will grant the player the first level benefits of that cleric domain, with the exception of weapon and armor proficiencies. So how we do this again is options. So obviously you have the different options for the different subclasses. If we look at Arcane Initiate, what we will find is the option basically, these options will be the section that grant all the mechanical benefits. So in this case, you'll get the Arcana skill and 2 cantrips. The key is this part, the prerequisite class feature option. As setting it to Arcane Domain means that they won't be able to mix and match. They will always pick the same thing when they hit those levels. And then, yeah, you mechanically input what happens there. Obviously, it does take a bit of time, because for every domain that you choose to allow for your clerics, you would add. Technically, the UA only had 3 of them, Arcana, Knowledge, and Light, but theoretically it would make sense to allow any of the cleric domains. And yes, basically that's how it works for all of these. The only one that's a little bit different is Arcane Initiate, which is when you gain a wizard level, you can replace 1 wizard spell with a cleric domain spell. And if you add all the domain spells to your spell book, you can add any spell from the cleric list instead. So let us just have a look. Yeah, there wasn't really a way to mechanically do this. it would probably take a bit of tinkering, adding the spells here in the subclass, and that the player learned. Unfortunately, it's a bit complicated. The system, because it's built to work with what the core books have, there has never really been a point where the urging never proceeded out of UA. So there's never been a point where you go, this class has access to this class's entire spell list. At least with the spell casting classes. So, yes, that's probably the best way to go about it. You could either add individual spells, or if I use a different example, because there are ways you can do it. There is it. It's for rogues. Excuse me just a second, everyone. I'm just finding... Safekeeper. It was... Might be able to do it with Bone Knight. Bone Knight. Yes. So one way you could do it is, once I find the section for, yes. So here, can I cast spells? Yes. Yep, so here you would put additional spell list. So you could go into wizard and go additional spell list cleric. That would mechanically allow the class to access that spell list, and then you would have to just remind the player you don't have access to cleric spells unless you use this option to replace one of your wizard spells with a cleric spell. So that is the other way, is additional spell list. Right then. So that is that. That is 2016. As I said, it's not a long video. It was mainly just going through some of the key hits of 2016. 2017, I think, has a bit more to it. If 2017 is a bit too small, I might do 2017, 2018. After that, I believe it begins to slow down heavily on UAs. Or the UAs that have been published are generally always going into books from that point. But I will have a quick look, and then I will do probably one more video after that about the Mystic Scion. And potentially how, if you wanted to redo a class or alter a class or do a new class, how you could maybe just about wrangle it into the current system. So yes, I hope that was helpful to people. As always, if there's any specific questions of things you would like to know, how does the Homebrew editor do this specific function, feel free to put it in the comments down below. I do check all of the comments, and yeah, until next time, see you.